It takes cleverness, strength and ruthlessness to lead the Skaven, and Claw Lords have all three. Having clawed, stabbed and plotted their way to the top of Skaven society, they make for cunning and cruel commanders. Hello there. In this video we're going to show you how to paint a Claw Lord on Norbeast so that he looks awesome on the battlefield and in your display cabinets. The paints we'll be using are on the screen right now. These paints will help to get our Claw Lord painted to a great standard. Remember that you don't have to do all of the highlights if you don't want to. We also have a list of the additional equipment we've used, but you can use whatever brushes you feel most comfortable with. If you're new to painting or want to brush up on your skills, you can check out the Citadel Color Painting Essentials playlist to learn all about our paints and techniques. As you can see, we sprayed our model with grey cere for a nice neutral undercoat. We've also got two sub-assemblies that will allow us to paint our Claw Lord and Norbeast separately. This just helps for ease of painting. Right, with all that said and done, let's get painting. We'll start off with painting the rocks and debris on the base. Steel Legion Drab works well for this as it will contrast the texture paint we'll be using later on. Remember, when base coating, to just mix a little bit of water with your paint so it's not too thick and goopy. We're now going to base all of the metallics on the base and the Norbeast. We'll be using Iron Warriors for this and using it to pick out the metalwork on the pillars and the working metals on the Norbeast. Just take your time doing this and be as neat as you can here, as it will save you time tidying up. Okay, we're going to use Runelord Brass to pick out the armor on the Norbeast and some of the other metallic details on the base. Runelord Brass is one of my favorite metallic colors and covers really nicely. Just remember to add a bit of water to allow it to flow smoothly off your brush. With the metallics finished, remember to change the water in your water pot, as you don't want any metallic flakes in the rest of your paints. Once you've done that, we'll pick out the wooden pillars with Wildwood contrast paint straight from the pot. Load up your brush so that it covers the area really nicely when you apply it. While we wait for the contrast to dry, we're going to use Sterling Mud texture paint to cover the entire base. For this, we'll be using the trusty Citadel texture tool. Once we've covered the base in our texture paint, we'll need to let the paint stand and dry for around an hour before we carry on with anything else. We're now going to pick out all of the Norbeast skin. We'll use Rakarth flesh for this. Remember to thin out your paint with a little bit of water and build up the coverage with multiple layers. This will help you to get that nice smooth finish for skin. So, when applying your first layer, try to avoid painting the same area multiple times. Get the paint onto the surface and then quickly move it around all of the skin detail. If you see large areas where the paint is very thin, don't worry about it. Wait for the layer of paint to dry completely before coming back to do another. You'll notice that you'll soon have a great coverage across the skin and a very smooth finish. With our skin blocked in, we're now going to do the fur. For this, we'll be using Gore Grunter fur straight from the pot and applying over the torso, around the head, down the legs and the stomach fur. Because we've based the skin with Rakarth flesh first, it helps to give us a nice warm undercoat for the contrast paint to sit on, which works really well. Also, once we've done our first layer, we'll let it dry completely and then come back to do another, especially focusing on the larger flat areas that we want to be brown. As you can see, the extra coat will really darken the fur up nicely, as well as give us some patches where it's much darker. This is great for breaking up the fur and making it look matted. I wouldn't recommend this for a hard surface like a tank, but for natural surfaces like skin and fur, it's a really cool and easy effect to do. Right, now that the texture paint is dry, we'll shade all of our painted details with Agrax Earthshade. Do each element at a time, going over the detail afterwards, making sure to soak up any excess pooling that you can find. Try to avoid getting Agrax Earthshade over your Rakarth flesh skin. If you do, just tidy back up with Rakarth flesh. We'll now pick out the leather straps with Cygor Brown. This is a very dark and pigmented brown, which contrasts really well for these details. With the leather picked out, we're going to wash the skin with Targor Raid Shade. When applying the wash, do it in sections going around all of the skin details. Remember to watch out for pooling, and if you see any, to soak it up with a dry brush. We'll now be using Caribou Crimson in two different ways. Firstly, we're going to use it to wash over the tail. We'll be applying it straight from the pot all over the tail. This is a really simple and effective way of getting that nice pink tone for our tail. When that is done, we're going to thin it out to a 2:1 ratio with Lamia medium and apply it over the infected skin areas showing through the brown fur, over the nose, inner ears, and around the mouth. Okay, it's time to tidy up the warp pool detail with grey cere, getting us ready for the next paint. Make sure to be as neat as you can when tidying up this detail. It's time to use Nasdrek yellow to block in the teeth, claws and nails. Nasdrek yellow is a great colour for this, as it is a very warm and dirty yellow that fits perfectly for our Skaven. Take your time blocking in these details to avoid having to tidy back up. With the teeth, claws and talons done, we're now going to pick out the eyes. We'll be using Flesh Terrors Red for this. When doing eyes, a good tip is to try and hold your breath if you can to keep your hand nice and steady. Okay, with those details done, we're now going to do the little bumps and skin deformities that we can see. We'll be using Plague Bearer's Flesh for this. We're going to pick out the scars, brandings, gums and tongue with Volupus Pink that has been thinned to a 1:4 ratio with Contrast Medium. We want to stain the surrounding area of scars and brandings, painting towards the deeper recesses. This will make sure that the paint is strongest there and thinnest on the outside. Then we'll completely cover the tongue and do the same staining around the gums. Once your first layer is dry, you can then use Volupus Pink straight from the pot to push the depth of colour even more. So I'm going to focus this into the deepest bit of the scars and then gently bleed the paint out around the skin to make it look more bruised. Alright, next up is to pick out the little horns that we can see. We'll be using Skeleton Horde for this. There's a few on the back, head and the jaw. Lastly, we're going to pick out the warp stones that have been imbued in our Norbeast body. For this, we'll be using Warp Lightning. This paint works so well for these details. Just remember to load up the brush so you get really good coverage. We'll now use Hexwraith Flame straight from the pot and cover the whirlpool details in the center of the base. Remember to load up your brush before applying and drop the paint onto the detail in blobs instead of traditional strokes. This will help to avoid texturing and tide marks showing when the paint dries. Okay, with that completed, all of our details for the base and Norbeast have been blocked in and shaded where appropriate. You can leave the Norbeast there and move on to doing the Claw Lord if you want to. However, I'm just going to show you how to take the Norbeast to the next level with some highlighting. Right, for our first highlight, we're going to use Rakarth Flesh to layer over the raised details of the skin. Make your way around the model, picking all of these details out. The benefit of relayering like this is that we get a really nice natural looking highlight for our skin, and it sets us up nicely for our next brighter highlight. With the skin layered up, we'll now highlight the highest areas, raised details and features with Pallid Wych Flesh. Take your time with the step and try to keep your highlight as sharp as you can. If you do make a mistake, don't worry, you can just tidy back up with the previous colour. When edge highlighting like this, it's worth it to roll your brush to a nice sharp point for accuracy and to try to paint towards yourself where you can. This helps to maintain control, as it is much easier to highlight towards yourself than away. Once you've finished with the skin, we'll move on to highlighting around the scars and brandings, looking to pick out the raised edges with a fine highlight. This helps just make them pop out a little bit more. When that is done, we'll then highlight the tail as well. The tail has these really nice ridges in it, so pick out each side as you move down the tail. Pallid Wych Flesh is a great colour for doing a final highlight on skin. Because it is an off-white, it works really well across various tones that we can find on our Norbeast. Time to pick out the fur next. Okay, we're moving on to the fur. For our first highlight, we'll be using Scrag Brown to pick out all of the sculpted fur. When picking out these details, try to be as neat as possible, leaving the Gore-grunta fur base layer in the recesses. Once you're done picking out the details, we'll then do small line highlights across the larger flat areas of the fur. This will help to add some texture and interest to our Norbeast. When doing this technique, try to keep your lines as small as possible because this will help to keep them in proportion with the model. The beauty of the dark and light patches of our base coat really shines through here with this first highlight, as it makes our fur look very naturalistic and matted. With that first stage highlight completed on the fur, we'll now use Deathclaw Brown to just take the highlight one step further. Pick out the very tips of the sculpted fur as well as the ends of your painted fur lines. By doing this, we'll make it look like the light is picking out the ends of the hair. Alright, with our fur coat done, we're almost finished with the Norbeast and base section. Just a few paints left to go before we can move on to doing the Clawlord. We're going to pick out the warp stones and eyes next, and luckily we have a paint that will do both of them. Dawn Yellow is a very bright yellow that works well as a highlight for our red eyes and thin edge highlight for our acid green warp stones. I'm focusing on the warp stones first, making sure to keep my lines as thin as possible, just picking out the very edges. If you make a mistake here, just tidy back up with Warp Lightning. Once that is done, I'm going to paint the center point of each red eye to give it an evil looking pupil. Hold your brush nice and gently and try to tap the point of the bristles onto the area where you want the pupil to be. Next, we'll be picking out the edges of the leather straps that we can find. For this, we're using Rakarth Flesh and a stipple highlighting the leather. This will help to give it a worn, scratchy finish that works well for Skaven. As always, when doing stippling, try to keep the scratches and dots in proportion with the area that you are applying it on. Alright, we're now going to use Screaming Skull in a few different ways. Firstly, we'll be edge highlighting the teeth, claws, talons and horns that we can find. Then we'll stipple highlight the very highest edges of the leather within the previous highlight. When that is done, we'll then move on to do a dry brush highlight across all of the details of the base. This will tie all of the elements together nicely and give them a dusty and old appearance. Now that we've highlighted all the details on the base, we're just going to punch some colour back into the wood and stone elements. For this, we'll be using Croak Green. This is an absolutely amazing shade paint that works so well for adding subtle colour to base details. When dry, it will look like moss is growing over the wood and the stone and helps to bring some visual interest to these features. With all those smaller details highlighted and our shade dry, our base and Norbeast is almost complete. All that's left to do is the metallic details. I'm going to start off with Canoptek Alloy over the gold details. Canoptek Alloy will highlight our Runelord brass really nicely without the risk of it being too stark, like what we'd get if we used Runefang Steel or Stormhost Silver. We want to show some aging to our gold, so it keeps within the Skaven aesthetic. When highlighting metallics, try to keep your edge highlight as thin as possible, as this will help to show that the surface is hard and sharp. Once our metallics are done, we'll just change the water in our water pot, as we don't want any metallic flakes in the rest of our paints. The final paint we'll be using in this section is Nihilakh Oxide, thinned to a 1:2 ratio with Lahmian Medium and applied all over the larger, flatter areas of the gold, as well as into any recesses or notches that we can find. Once your first layer is dry, you can come back and do another if you want to, building up the layers over each other to add some texture and make it look like there has been a heavier and thinner areas of verdigris. When you are happy with the amount of layers that you have, you can, if you want to, apply a small amount of pure Nihilakh Oxide into the deepest recesses and notches. With that completed, our Norbeast and base are done and look awesome. It's time to start on the Clawlord. We'll be using a lot of the same paints on him as well. We're going to start by blocking in all of the colours first, doing some shading and then moving on to doing the highlighting later on. With this in mind, we're going to pick out all of the skin and we'll be using Rakarth Flesh for this, just like the Norbeast. If you get any paint onto the armour sections, tidy that up with Grey Seer before moving on to the next paint. The next paint we'll be using is Flesh Tearers Red and will block in the red armour and the eyes. Flesh Tearers Red is a great choice for this, as it is a very deep and rich red. The added benefit of it being a contrast paint means that it will pull away from the raised edges to give us a nice subtle highlight for free as well. Just remember to load up your brush when applying the paint and to almost drop or dab it onto the details. Traditional brush strokes won't work here, as that will leave you with unwanted tide marks as the paint dries. When you've finished with all of the armour sections, swap to a smaller brush and pick out the eyes. We're now going to focus on doing the robe, and for this we'll be using Sigvolt Burgundy. The same technique as before with contrast paint. Remember to load up your brush and apply over the area in sections, allowing the paint to flood over the robe. Be careful going around any previously painted details, as Sigvolt Burgundy is a very pigmented contrast paint, so will stain over the other painted details. Our red armor and burgundy robe look awesome. Flesh Tearers Red is such a great paint and happens to be one of my personal favorite reds in the range. Alright, with that done, it's time to get the smaller details based. If we look at the miniature, we can see loads of little leather straps and bindings that need to be picked out. For these, we're going to use Cygor Brown. We use this paint on the same details on our Norbeast, so this is a good opportunity to tie the Clawlord together with his mount. Try to be as neat as you can with the application, but if you do make a mistake, tidy back up with the previous colours. Our next detail to do is the spear shaft, and for this we'll be using Wildwood. It's the same paint that we use for the wood details on the base, which is cool. Okay, so now we need to pick out the grip on the spear shaft as well as bits of rope that we can see on our Clawlord's belt. By using snakebite leather here, we give a nice contrasting brown to our leather and wood browns, which is visually pleasing to the eye. Right, with those three details done and looking great, we now need to pick out a couple of features on our Clawlord himself. For the long fur on our Clawlord, we're going to use Basilicanum Grey to darken them down with a dingy looking grey tone. It'll contrast nicely with the fur on our Norbeast and help to separate him a bit from it. Just take your time painting these areas, as you don't want to overspill onto your previously painted areas. If you do, just tidy back up with the previous paint. Once we've finished painting the fur, we're then going to use Basilicanum Grey to recess shade around the red armor in order to punch it up with a bit more depth. Again, take your time doing this, making sure to control the application. I would recommend using a small layer brush to help with control. Okay, the last little detail to do for now will be painting the teeth, claws and talons with Nazdrake Yellow to match the same details on our Norbeast. This is one of my favourite things to do on Skaven models because it seems to bring them to life really nicely. Nazdrake Yellow is such a great warm and dirty yellow that it just works so perfectly for Skaven. Our Clawlord has most of the little details done and ready for the next level later on. So we're now going to focus on the metallics for a bit. For our first metallic, we'll be using Runelord Brass to pick out the spear, the giant mean looking spikes of death on his back, the gun casing, as well as his little earring. Take your time with these details, as any mistake will need to be tidied back up, so it's worth it to be neater in order to save time later on. Thinning your Runelord Brass out with some water to maintain control of the paint will really help with the process here as well. The next paint will be Iron Warriors that we'll use to pick out all of the silver metallics. So these will be the chainmail, gun barrels and the little spikes on the spear shaft. With the metallics done, we're going to focus on the last remaining details that need to get based in. We're going to use Skeleton Horde to pick out the horns that are starting to grow out of our Clawlord's head. Once the first layer is dry, do another towards the bottom of the horns and you'll get a really cool and easy two-tone effect going on your horns that helps to make them pop out a little bit more. Our next paint will be Soulblight Grey that we'll use on the skulls that are impaled on his back spikes. By using Soulblight Grey, we'll give our skulls a bleach bone effect rather than a dirty yellow bone that Skeleton Horde would give, and therefore they'll stand out a bit more on the gold-tinted spikes. Having the contrasting warm and cold tones together helps to show off the various awesome details that we can find on the model. However, if you want to use something like Skeleton Horde on these skulls, please go ahead and do so. Okay, it's time to pick out the spearhead with Warp Lightning. Our Clawlord is obviously very rich, or is very good at sneak stealing warp stones from other unwary Skaven. Regardless, he's got himself a big, mean-looking warpstone spear that looks great when applying warp lightning all over it. The skulls and warpstone blade really stand out and add a lot of character to our Clawlord. For our first shade, we'll be using Agrax Earthshade to wash over all of the gold and silver details. Remember that when doing an all-over wash to look out for any pooling and to soak it up with dry bristles. A good easy trick to catch any pooling quickly is to do your wash in sections and then tidy as you go. If you do all of the details at once and then come back to tidy, you may risk the wash drying, and then when you try to soak it up, you'll leave unwanted stains and tide marks. Our next shade is Targor Raid Shade that we'll be applying over all of the skin. Targor Raid Shade is a great utility shade that goes over loads of different paints. It's fantastic over metallics as well. For our last shade, we're using Caribou Crimson to pick out the tail, tongue, gums, nose and inner ear. This is the same paint that we use for these areas on the Norbeast, so again, it will help to tie the two separate rats together nicely. With those shades done, our Clawlord is now completely battle ready. You can leave him there if you want to, and feel confident that he looks awesome and ready to lead his swarm to war. However, we're now going to do some highlighting to take him to the next level. We're going to focus on the metallics first, and we'll pick out the gold details with Canoptek Alloy. This is the same highlight that we did on the gold on the Norbeast, so you'll be well skilled in the application now. Just remember to keep the edge highlight as thin as you can to help sell the effect of a hard, sharp surface. Our next metallic will be Runefang Steel that we'll use on all of the silver details. Take your time when doing the little details on the gun. I would recommend rolling your brush to a sharp point to allow for greater control when picking out the edges. Our metallics are done and they look great. We're now going to carry on with the rest of the highlights. Alright, we're going to pick out the red armor next, and for this we'll be using Evil Sunz Scarlet. It's a bright and vibrant red that works really nicely for our armor. Try and use the edge of your brush where you can to help keep your highlights nice and consistent across the armor. With that first edge highlight on the red done, we're going to move on to using Fire Dragon Bright. Apply only a little bit of water to your paint here to help it come off your brush smoothly. Fire Dragon Bright is a very thin layer paint already, so we don't want to dilute it too much. It is a lot brighter than Evil Sunz Scarlet, so try to make sure your edge highlight is nice and thin and within the previous highlight. Take your time with this. It's worth it for the awesome effect that it will give. We'll now focus on highlighting the Clawlord's cloak. We're going to use Pink Horror for our highlight. Make your way around the cloak, picking out all of the folds, obvious raised areas and edges. The sculpt is really helpful here as there are clear raised edges that make it nice and easy to highlight. Okay, with the red armor and cloak highlighted, we'll now do a second highlight on the cloak with Kislev Flesh. We're looking to only do small dots on the highest folds and edges just to show off where the light catches the cloak the most. With those highlights done, our armor and cloak are now finished. We're going to move on to highlighting the skin details next. Firstly, we're going to use Rakarth Flesh to layer over the raised and flat surfaces of the skin, leaving the Targor Raid shade in the recesses. This will set us up nicely for our next highlight. If you make a mistake here, just reapply Targor Raid shade into the recesses. Once we're done with that, we'll also stipple highlight the leather straps in the exact same way that we did the leather straps on the Norbeast. Remember to keep these small and in proportion with the detail. Alright, for our second highlight, we'll be using Pallid Witch Flesh as an edge highlight to pick out all of the highest raised areas and features of our Clawlord, mainly focusing around the facial details and knuckles on the hands and toes. Because we relayered with Rakarth Flesh, you can easily tidy back up if you make a mistake with the second highlight. Once you're done with that, don't forget to pick out the tail as well. Our skin is now fully highlighted and our Clawlord is starting to look great. Next, we're going to pick out all of the leather and wood details. Firstly, we'll pick out the wooden spear shaft with Baneblade Brown. When we look at the sculpt, we can see that there are ridges all along it. We just want to gently glide the edge of our brush over the ridges, picking them out. Be careful when going near previously painted details. Okay, we need to move on to using Screaming Skull for a couple of different areas. Firstly, we'll be doing a second highlight on the leather, highlighting within the previous layer, accentuating the most raised edges as well as making the leather look nice and worn. When leather wears, it goes lighter as it's worn away. Screaming Skull works perfectly for this. Next, we'll highlight the claws, talons and teeth. Screaming Skull is a great complement for Nazdreg Yellow because it helps to highlight the detail nicely. We're going to move on to highlighting a lot of the little details next. Right, we're going to pick out the raised features of the skulls that are impaled on the back spikes. For this, we're using Grey Seer. Just keep the highlights to the features and let your Soulblight Grey shade do the rest of the work for you. When we're done with that, we'll then pick out the tips of the grey fur. Take your time with the process, and if you make a mistake, tidy back up with the previous colours. With the scales and grey hair picked out, our Clawlord is almost done. Just a few more details to go. We're now going to use White Scar to just push the skull highlights even further, painting within the lines of our previous highlights, picking out all of the features of the skull. If you make a mistake here, tidy back up with Grey Seer and Soulblight Grey where appropriate. By having our skulls look like bleach bone, we've contrasted them against the warmer colours on the model. This really helps to make these skulls just pop out a little bit more and draw the eye to the detail. Right, we're going to be using Dawn Yellow to add a dot to the eyes. When doing eyes, try to use the point of your brush to add a small dot of paint. A good tip when painting eyes is to hold your breath if you can during the process. Once that is done, we're then using Dawn Yellow to edge highlight the Warpstone spearhead. Because it is such a bright and vibrant yellow, it works perfectly as our edge highlight over the Warp Lightning paint that we used on the spearhead. Okay, so we're in the last stretch now. We're going to thin out Nihilakh Oxide to a 1:2 ratio with Lahmian Medium and then start to cover the larger flat areas of gold details. We're doing the exact same method that we did on the Norbeast earlier in the video. Once the first layer is dry, you can come back to do more if you want to in order to build up the effect. Just remember to let it dry completely before doing another layer. Your last layer could also be pure undiluted Nihilakh Oxide into the deepest recesses if you want to. Next up, we're going to apply Croak Green into the recesses of the wooden spear shaft. This will punch a bit of colour onto our wood as well as make it look aged and weathered. Croak Green is a great paint for adding a bit of colour to natural details such as wood, stone and bones. Speaking of which, we're going to also put it into the recesses of the two skulls that are impaled on the back spikes. It will break up the starkness of the bleach bone look by adding a muted green undertone. And there we go. With our Dawn Yellow, Nihilakh Oxide and Croak Green applied, the last details are finished. Now you can leave your Clawlord here and be super happy with what you've accomplished. But we're just going to show you how to do a little freehand detail on the shoulder pad. If we look at the box, we can see that there are a row of little triangles on the Clawlord's left shoulder pad. We're going to quickly paint those on for you. We'll be using Screaming Skull to map out the triangles first, starting bigger at the outer edges and slowly getting smaller towards the center. Once you've mapped them out, then fill them in. Keep your paint nice and thin for this, as you don't want to add any unwanted texturing here. When you've done with one side, repeat the process on the other. It's a simple and easy way to add a little bit of character to your Clawlord. Awesome! With the freehand detail done, our Clawlord is now completed. We've attached him to his Norbeast, added some Mordian corpse grass tufts and painted the rim of the base with Corvus Black. Feel free to paint yours in whatever colour matches the rest of your army. And there we go. With that last step done, our Clawlord on Norbeast is complete and ready to lead his Skaven to victory across the mortal realms. We've had a lot of fun with this video and we hope that it's given you the inspiration to get your Clawlord on Norbeast painted and onto the battlefield. For more tutorials, tips and tricks, check out our videos on the Warhammer YouTube channel or head to your local Warhammer store where our amazing staff will be more than happy to help. Well, we hope you've enjoyed this video and we'll see you again soon. Bye bye!